2, 1.
Welcome to Made for More Living.
One small step for man.
With Johnny Jennings.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
The fastest and most exciting hour of news, events, and real estate in Northern California.
And this is a fact that was proved.
Powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
Does everybody know what time it is?
Get ready. Here we go.
Everybody talks about real estate and how it is a great investment strategy. And most people, when they're talking about real estate, they're referring to residential real estate. You hear about all the millionaires and stuff that were made through real estate. But today on the show, we have a special guest. His name is Paul Frank. And Paul is with PDF Group of Companies. He's the president and CEO. And Paul Frank, how did you begin? How did you get started in commercial real estate?
Boy, that is a long story. It was actually pretty much from birth. I was born at South Lake Tahoe. My dad was a pit boss, and my mom was a cocktail waitress at Harvey's up
Match
at South
made
Lake.
in heaven.
Yeah. And my dad realized that the gambling industry wasn't a place that he wanted to raise a family, so he started dabbling in real estate. And I was blessed to have a father that dressed me up in a little suit and tie from an absurdly young age and took me literally everywhere. So from 5 years old on, I went everywhere with him.
You don't strike me as a suit and tie type.
That's probably why I don't do that anymore.
Really? Yeah. I've never seen you dressed in, like, fanciest I've seen you is a polo.
Yeah, you used to dress, but yeah, not so much anymore.
So in the mid-2000s, there was a correction coming, and were you in commercial real estate at that time? Like, did you ride that wave, or what happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, coming into 2006, 7, had run through several developments as commercial developer. It was interesting because I did one office project. It was probably a $20, $25 million project, and the financial package that I submitted was probably a foot thick. And then the second project was maybe $40 million project, and it was about 2 inches thick, and the bank was saying, hey, what's next? And it made me uncomfortable at that time, and I couldn't figure out what people were doing. And then all of a sudden, brokers would say, hey, come look at this project. It's a no-brainer. I would go out and not even pull my calculator out because the numbers didn't work. Next thing I knew, somebody else, another developer, would buy it and start processing a project. And I went through what I would consider a identity crisis because I didn't understand the game anymore. It was a trying time.
So you were like, hey, these numbers that you're giving me don't make sense to move forward with this project, but then somebody else would buy the project, and you're like, what am I missing here?
Yeah. And going back to my dad, I was 7 years old. The beauty and the pain of the time that I spent with my dad was that it was during some very difficult economic times. I remember my dad having 18, 19, 20% interest rate loans, and I remember the mental and physical toll that it took on him. Ultimately, he died at 60 years old, so it was a heavy toll. But I left this meeting with him, and I remember it was like yesterday. I was 7 years old, south side of Golden Gate Park. Meeting didn't go well. My dad was 6'5", 265. He's holding my little hand, and he looks down at me, and he says, never do a deal for the sake of doing a deal. It's like, who says that to a 7-year-old? Yeah. So fast forward to 2006, these people are telling me to do these deals. The bank will give me any amount of money that I want to do a deal. And I remembered my dad telling the 7-year-old version of me, never do a deal just for the sake of doing a deal, which is what kept me, on the sidelines and not in the game. Thank goodness.
But you staying on the sidelines, that ended up being a good thing.
Yeah. So I couldn't figure out what everybody was doing. It was mentally, it was like if you were a dentist and all of a sudden nobody had teeth. The only thing I knew was the development game, and the rules had changed so much that I didn't understand it anymore. So I took the LSAT. I was going to go to law school, didn't necessarily want to practice law, but I didn't know what else to do. And then
that's a common thing. You don't know what to do. I'm going to go to law school. That's what most people think. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, because I'd been in this game for a long time, built a lot of relationships, and I started getting some calls from banks that needed some help. And this was before anybody knew that this 2007-8 thing was coming. So they brought me in, and as they put it, most of the developers were toxic, and most of the commercial brokers only knew how to put a sign in the ground and fill out some paperwork. So I was the fixer, if you will. So they gave me a pile of projects to analyze because they didn't know what to do with them. And the first 5 that I went out to were actually projects that I had passed on in the years prior to that, which was this epiphany moment that I wasn't quite as stupid as I thought I was, and all of this self-questioning was maybe not necessarily correct.
So you didn't have to go to law school after all?
No. So took the LSAT, but never enrolled.
So when the banks are coming to you asking questions and trying to get you to help them, how does that process work? How do you help the banks fix these projects?
Well, I did pre-foreclosure analysis first, which was, hey, we're looking at bringing this thing back. What do you think? What's our exit strategy? Are there any landmines on it? So it was interesting because I would take a look at, the source of where the chronology and history of these deals, which was fascinating. And I would basically give a nod that, yeah, this makes sense to take back. And then we would handle the stabilization and disposition on the brokerage side. Some of them were quite a bit more complicated than others, but they were all interesting for sure.
Interesting. So when you say take them back, basically foreclose on is what's happening?
Correct. Yeah.
And so how does the bank, if they foreclose on a project that's in development still, how does that work on the bank side? Great case study was a subdivision here in the region that in this case, they foreclosed on it without my knowledge and had assigned a brokerage to it that was trying to sell it, I think, for $4 or $5 million. And this is a great example of kind of a breadth of our experience and network and how we leveraged it. But we went out there and met with the suits for this national bank and walked the property. And I brought my civil engineering contractor and my civil engineer because they're buddies, and we went and had lunch afterward. And we're walking this property. We get up to the top of it, and we asked the suits, hey, do you have a notice of violation on this from the Army Corps of Engineers? And they said, no, there's no problem. And we're like, yeah, there's some issues here. So about 2 months later, they found all of the notices in an office in North Carolina, which ultimately, I think the fine was about 85 million in fines that had accumulated because of these transgressions on the previous owner's part that was developing it. So that was a worst case. That took me about 9 years to work them through and get out of it. And some of them were, obviously much simpler. Crazy, 9 years.
Yeah. What's
the typical, first off, is there a typical transaction length? And if there is, what would you say it is for a commercial deal?
No typical. Okay. I mean, it can be, I guess the key is, and the biggest differentiator for those that are not familiar with commercial real estate, is the financing process and the appraisal process. That, in fact, I do classes on commercial finance and development underwriting just to kind of give new investors exposure to that. Because if you go and buy a duplex or a fourplex, it is based on your financial ability to service that debt, where in the commercial space, it's all about the property and underwriting the performance of the property that allows the bank to do that loan. Regardless of what your financial statement looks like, that property needs to perform. So that part of it, the underwriting, the appraisal process, is really a driver in the timeline for these deals.
Got it. And then if somebody wants to reach out to you about learning more about investing in commercial, what's the best way for them to contact you?
They can directly email me at Paul, Paul, at PDF, like the Adobe file, -USA.com. So Paul at PDF-USA.com.
Wonderful. And if you forget about that email and you're like, I'm not getting hearing back, go ahead and reach out to me as well. You just, Google us and we'll get you connected to Paul. Paul's one of the guys that we work with most closely on the commercial side. When we come back after this, we're going to talk about the difference between residential real estate and commercial, because I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot of people wanting to get into that space and they just don't know how to do it. Back after this.
Never going to happen. Too complicated. That's what a real estate agent, Mike, told Matthew, who wanted to sell his home. And so he was bummed. He was discouraged that he couldn't sell his home until he called up our good friend Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. And Johnny said, hey, don't be discouraged. I can sell any home. And that's exactly what he did. He sold Matthew's home in record time and for full price.
See, that's what happens when you work with the professionals, Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. They think outside of the box. They can help you get to where you need to be. And so if you're curious what kind of offers you can get on your home, the high end, the low end, maybe you just want a cash offer so you can just be done and be like, I just need to move on, Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team can help you. You can reach out at 855-TOM-DAVES, or you can always go online to tomdaves.com. That's Tom, DAVES.com. And Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team is going to take care of you. License number 581837.
This is Made for More Living with Johnny Jennings, powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
So I'm here with Paul Frank. He is the president and CEO of PDF Group of Companies. And in the previous segment, we were talking about how your dad helped you get started in the industry, or he was an influence on you in the industry. And he said something to you when you were 7 years old. He said, don't do a deal for the sake of a deal. Is that right?
Don't do a deal for the sake of doing a deal.
Don't do a deal for the sake of doing a deal. And that saved your bacon. Well, and that's crazy that you remembered it at 7 years old.
Vividly.
It's like that's so incredible. And so he said that, and then you're going through the industry and you're in the commercial space in 2005, 2006, and
yeah, going into 2007, before it all hit the fan, yeah.
So you saw and so you're going in that, and you just heard your dad's voice, don't do a deal for the sake of doing a deal.
Yep. The banks were willing to give me any amount of money to do any project because I had a long history of success, and it was tempting. It was very, very tempting. Hard to walk away from the table, as my dad would put it.
And how, at that point, in 2007, how long had you been in the industry?
My entire life. Like I said, my dad started dragging me around when I was 5 years old, and he struggled and worked his tail off throughout his career. I remember to the point, before we had these computers and access to all of this information, he used to set me up with some peanut butter sandwiches and chocolate milk in a lawn chair at a corner with a little map, and I would count cars because he was trying to put 7-Eleven deals together.
Really?
So we didn't have access to all this stuff. So I would sit there for the entire day and make little notes and count the cars, making left turns, right turns, which way they went.
And would he make like business decisions based off your count?
Well, like Southland Corporation back then would, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's so much trust in a kid.
Yeah.
So
I didn't quite understand it, I'm sure.
I don't know if I would, I don't know. My kid's only 2 years old, so we'll see what he's like when he's 5 to 7. But, man, that just means your dad probably saw a lot in you at an early age.
Free labor.
Free labor. But it's expensive labor if the count's off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So what I'm seeing a lot of, and honestly, I've have an interest in it personally as well. Like Grant Cardone, I'm sure you've heard that name before, talks like he has kind of brought commercial real estate, at least to the forefront of many people's minds, whether it's 16 units or more. But commercial real estate is more than just a place for tenants to live. There's so many different classifications to it, correct?
Correct.
And so with that awareness, I'm also starting to see more people inquire because there's so many people competing for single-family homes. Are they even a good buy right now? There's a lot of conversations around that. Are you seeing an increased interest in commercial properties at all?
Yeah, I do a lot of Zoom calls and teaching in the commercial space for residential agents and investors. And there is definitely a lot of interest. I mean, there's a lot of people out there speaking on the internet and other places about the subject. So it definitely garners a lot of attention and questions.
So when you're teaching on it, what are the biggest things that you see potential investors be surprised about or pitfalls that they can fall into?
Yeah, without question, the biggest differentiator coming out of the residential space to commercial is CRE finance, commercial real estate finance. I tell people everything you know about finance relative to residential, throw it out the window when you get into the commercial space because there's some shocking differences too.
So you were sharing that some of those differences include, hey, as long as you can qualify for the monthly payment, whether you're paying that, you got to qualify initially, but 5, 6 years down the line, whether you're paying it or your relative's paying it or somebody else is making that monthly payment, the big banks don't care as long as the checks are coming in. But that's not how commercial financing works, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So whether it's a single family residence or anything that 4 units or under that falls into residential finance, it is based on individual capacity to serve that debt. So you could get somebody that's making $2 million a year and go buy a $5 million second home. Mm-hmm. As long as they make that payment every single month, it's based on their ability to pay and their actual payment history, right? Nobody bothers them. They could be selling assets, borrowing money. As long as they make that monthly payment, B of A or Wells Fargo doesn't talk to them. In commercial, it is, for the most part, and this is a generality, but it is asset-based. It's the performance of the asset that underwrites the debt. So that same person that bought a $5 million second home goes to buy a $5 million little retail center. They are shocked to find out that there is all sorts of criteria and requirements that aren't required of that second home that are definitely differentiators.
So what are some basic qualifications? Like, what does a property have? Is it based off cash flow? Is it based off the age? Like, how do you determine that? So
the first of all, in residential, let's say you have a 30-year fully amortized loan. You've got 30 years, 360 payments, equal payments. In our world, or CRE finance, the norm for an investment property is a 25-year amortization. So that's the period of time that the payments are calculated on. We have what's called a 10-year term, which is equivalent to a balloon payment. So every 10 years, you got to refinance the property.
Wow.
And then we have usually a 5-year rate reset. Even if they call it a fixed, you have a 5-year rate reset. So if you look at that continuum, you start out with a loan, it's a 25-year AM, you got a 10-year term or call, and a 5-year rate reset. And it's that 5-year rate reset and the 10-year term that creates a lot of turbulence, because if you qualified for a loan or a property did in year one, if you're in a different performance and interest environment at 5 and 10, it can create some significant problems.
Why do they do that? Why are all these extra requirements?
The thing that, and I don't know this for a fact, but I know I've been doing this a long time, and this is what I've discussed with lenders, is that, and you'll know this, what's the typical time that somebody's in a home mortgage?
Like 5 to 7 years.
5 to 7 years. So people buy houses for a lot of different reasons: divorces, deaths, kids, all job changes, right? There are factors that influence that turnover.
Definitely.
In commercial, if you got a 30-year fixed rate loan at 3% on a $20 million retail center, you would never sell that in a 6-7% environment. The bank would be exposed to that 3% debt for 30 years potentially. So from my experience, it's that exposure. This guarantees, for the most part, a turnover of that debt exposure in 10 years or reset in 5 years.
Okay. And then you said there's also even like issues where technical default can come into play on an annual basis.
Yeah. So essentially, and this is one of the most shocking things that new participants in the commercial space will run into is these annual reviews. So essentially, we will have covenants in a loan that require a certain liquidity, occupancy, all sorts of different things. One of the biggest is DSCR, or debt service coverage ratio, which is the difference between the net operating income of the property and the payment. So the floor these days is of a DSCR is 1.3. So if you can picture a loan payment of $10,000 a month, the bank wants to see a minimum of 1.3 times that, so $13,000 a month in net operating income. If that net operating income is $12,500, it's still positive $2,500 a month.
Yeah.
But it's in technical default because it's not meeting that floor requirement, which gives the bank the ability to foreclose for technical default.
Wow. So the bank likely to foreclose for technical default in situations like that?
It depends. I mean, they want to get out of the property's whole, and they will analyze the picture. Sometimes they'll work with situations, and other times they'll recognize that as their opportunity to get out, get their money out of it. And it's interesting you bring up Grant Cardone. I was at an event with him a couple of years ago, and his entire 10X system, if you will, he talked about the source of that, and where that came from was, and I don't want to quote Grant verbatim here, but essentially I believe he had $50 million in debt back in 2008 or so.
Correct.
And the banks called him in and called him on all of his debt. And he said, "What are you talking about? I'm performing. All the loans are current." Well, he was in technical default.
Yep.
So he went home that night and said, "Hey, good news, bad news," to his wife, and said, "Hey, banks are calling all of our loans. Good news, I figured it out. We need to 10X this and owe $500 million instead of $50 million, so we're too big to do this to."
Exactly.
The efficacy of that strategy I can't speak to, but that's where he says the 10X came from.
That's 100%. I've heard the same story from him a couple of times. And but my question is, if you're in technical default, like let's use Grant's, for example, or a hypothetical, how do you, because he didn't default on any of the properties, how do you get out of technical default? Like, how do you reverse that process? Well,
and I teach like I said, I teach this class to residential agents and new people. But if you can picture a 5-year rate reset, and you have this DSCR, right, the performance. Now all of a sudden, you're in our example that we had $10,000 a month with a 1.3 DCR means you got to bring in $13,000.
Yeah.
Well, now let's assume that $13,000 net operating income isn't changing, but now a rate reset turns that $10,000 payment into $12,000 a month. You're still positive $1,000 a month, but you're in technical default. So your choices are pay the loan off, pay the loan down. So now the payment on that will be 1.3 compliant with the net operating income, or potentially foreclosure. Those are the three choices.
In any instances, are you able to refinance the debt?
The rate reset really is a refinance in the current environment, if you will, or even the 10-year is in the current rate environment. You potentially could go to private lenders and, hard money loans to try to get around that DSCR, but that's obviously pretty dangerous.
So if we're on year 4, you're in technical default, it's going to reset in 5, interest rates have dropped, you're saying it typically you wouldn't just refinance early? Are you locked into that 5-year?
Well, and that's an interesting thing too. Typically in commercial loans, you'll have a prepayment penalty.
Oh, really?
Usually it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is sort of the standard.
Like 5%?
5% first year, 4, 3, 2, 1. There are some other structures to prepayments, like what's called a swap. in commercial real estate that can. That's sort of like betting on the come line on the crap table. It's just it's a very complicated equation to come up with a prepayment penalty that takes the bank to calculate that for you. But to your point, you have to, if you get 3 years in on the loan, you've got a prepayment penalty that you've got to calculate into that as well.
Man, it just seems like a totally different animal for an investor to get involved in commercial.
100%, totally different.
All right, so when we come back after this, we will be discussing the major pitfalls and whether or not somebody even should consider investing in commercial real estate.
Man, I love getting to work with experts and professionals because there are so many things in this world that seem so overly complicated. And all of a sudden you talk to an expert like Johnny Jennings and you're like, oh, I'm so glad you know what you're doing and I don't. Because my house isn't on the market, but I was having some issues and I was asking Johnny Jennings for some advice. He's like, this is what you do. And he connected me with some people and we were able to find an answer to my question. And that's what I love when you work with a professional like that. He's going to take care of you and make sure that all of your questions are answered.
Sure. That's the difference with Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. They are all about service and trust and taking the time to answer all your questions. So if your question is, well, what would my home sell for? Go to tomdaves.com, type in your address. Right away, you find out what kind of offers you would get, the low and high end, and listen to this, how much you would get if you wanted a cash offer for your home today, no matter what kind of condition it's in. The website again is tomdaves.com, or you can give Johnny Jennings a call today at 855-TOM-DAVES. License number 581837.
This is Made for More Living with Johnny Jennings, powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
I'm back with Paul Frank. He is the president and CEO of PDF Group of Companies, and we are talking about commercial real estate. A lot of people are looking to get into commercial real estate, but it's not for everybody. Let's start off with who is it not for? Like, what are some typical pitfalls you see people fall into when they're getting involved in commercial real estate?
Again, the biggest by far is the understanding of CRE finance and what that loan structure looks like, underwriting in the process. It's just so absolutely different that I don't care if you've got 30 years of experience in flipping and doing single family or even fourplex investments. If you've never engaged in CRE finance, it's shocking to those people.
So is there a way that when you're sitting down and meeting with a potential client and they're saying, hey, I'm interested in getting started in commercial, like, how do you filter, is this person prepared or are they, have no clue what they're getting themselves into?
Yeah, it's a touchy area because you don't want to lecture or come off as condescending. So we'll ask, and I just got done with a call this morning on this very subject, coaching a couple people on the questions to ask, which is, oh, that's great. What's your strategy on acquiring this property? Let's say they're looking at a $5 million retail center. Are you looking at doing a cash buy or are you looking to finance? And if they say finance, then you'll ask the question, oh, have you done commercial finance before? And if so, who's your lender? And if the answer is no, that's a huge red flag that there's going to be some education involved in this.
Interesting. So what's why is that a red flag? Just it means they've never done this before, or?
Yeah, I mean, you like I said, you could have decades of experience in single family finance and turning houses and whatever, but when you get into that commercial space, the underwriting is just absolutely completely different.
So I thought a cash buyer would be like, okay, that's good. I want to work with that. But you're like, that's not always a good thing.
No, if their answer is cash, that definitely, eliminates that CRE finance component. So the finance or the cash answer is a good answer for sure.
Okay. And then, because we were talking a little bit too about just people, like, I think we used a dentist example off the air where somebody will come in and say they want to buy a building for easy math, $10 million, and the bank will lend up to 70%, so that's $7 million. And the dentist is like, great, let's go. But what they're not factoring into the equation is that DSCR of 1.3, which, as you said, is pretty common. For the 1.3, does that go up or down based off of your experience or your the building's performance or your credit score? Like, is that just a generic number that, like, how is that determined?
Yeah. So and going back to that example and to all my dentist friends, I don't mean to pick on them, but what you will see often is that a newly engaged commercial investor like a dentist will go to their bank and say, hey, I'm looking at this retail center. It's $10 million. What will you loan on it? And the bank's response will be, oh, we'll loan up to 70% LTV with a 1.3 DSCR. And that DSCR is not understood, and most of the time they won't ask. They understand 70% LTV, so now they go into the acquisition process, get through with the underwriting, and then find out that to meet the DSCR, say a 1.3, is actually a 55% loan, not a 70% loan, and that is an absolute shock over and over. So as far as that floor goes, it moves with the market a little bit. I mean, going back to 2005-06, you would see 1.2, 1.25.
Okay.
Now they've become post that event, they're more conservative, so you'll see a 1.3, 1.35. To answer your question, I don't see it move so much depending on the individual investor. It's more of a bank policy for underwriting.
Okay. All right. So it's not like you can come in, hey, I have a portfolio of 50 million or 100 million. I'm buying this property for $5 million. They'll do a debt CR of 1.4.
Well, 1.4 would be bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Or 1.2, I guess.
Yeah. Then you get into some cross-collateralization options and things, but just for your standard off-the-shelf acquisition, it's usually going to be a 1.3, 1.35. I don't see 1.25s very often anymore.
Okay. And so we were talking about that again. That we'll just say dentist or that professional who got involved in the process and they thought, okay, 70% loan to value, I can do that. They didn't consider the DSCR, the debt service coverage ratio. Where was their commercial agent? Like, how in that process? Wouldn't that have been the conversation up front?
For us, yeah. We and as you know, I've been a coach and an athlete most of my life, so that coaching and teaching part is kind of in my DNA, probably from my dad, and saved my butt. So we do a lot of that education part of it, and we're not just brokers, and I don't mean that in a negative standpoint, because we have the development and the ownership and the construction side, so we understand the full spectrum. In fact, our trademark is dirt to disposition, because we sort of have a pretty broad understanding and experience in the space. Okay. But you're correct that you would think that in residential you'll want a pre-qual, right, for somebody that's going to go and buy a house.
Exactly.
We don't have pre-quals because the underwriting of the debt on the asset is based on the performance of the asset. So they can't say, oh, we will loan Dr. Smith $7 million on anything, because that's not the case.
So the loan is based on the property, but the down payment has to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So do you do any qualifying, or do commercial brokers do any qualifying of, hey, how much proof of funds do you have if you're shopping in this price range?
Yeah, it's again, the people with it don't necessarily like to be questioned, so it's you usually know who you're dealing with, and asking those sort of leading questions on the experience side and who they've secured debt with before. If you have somebody that's got a bunch of experience on the residential side, never gotten into the commercial side, then we'll do some more work and questioning to make sure that they're prepared and capable of performing.
That's so wild. You're buying a property. Like, why wouldn't you just provide proof of funds? Why is that an offensive question? I guess I just don't. I agree with you. Like, you're right.
Yeah,
but I just don't understand why it's offensive.
If somebody has a lot of experience in the space and they want to go buy a retail center, and you say, "Hey, can I see proof of funds for $3-4 million?" It's just something that isn't generally done.
It'll burn that relationship.
Yeah, just it doesn't start it off well.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for sharing that info, Paul. When we come back, we will be talking about how real estate agents can expand their business in commercial real estate.
So, Mike, can you imagine having to pay not one, but two mortgages at the same time?
I mean, I wouldn't want to, because I would not get any sleep at all. That's
right.
just scary.
Well, listen to what happened with Colin. He bought a home in West Sacramento, but he had yet to sell his previous home. So he was in a situation where he was going to have to pay for two mortgages. Then, of course, he reached out to our good friend, Johnny Jennings, with the Tom Daves real estate team. And Johnny, listen to this, was able to get him an offer on his home in 2 weeks. Colin was so excited and happy.
Yeah, he finally got to get a good night's sleep, not having to stress about stuff. And that's the benefit of working with the professionals, Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. Because when you have someone on your side like Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team, you don't have to stress about stuff, because you know things are going to get taken care of. And if you're curious what kind of offers you can get on your home, the high end, the low end, or maybe just a cash offer, and be like, I'm done, I need to move on, 2 mortgage payments just sounds scary, give them a call today, 855-TOM-DAVES, or you can always go online to tomdaves.com. That's Tom, DAVES.com, because Johnny Jennings and his team will take very, very good care of you. License number 581837.
This is Made for More Living with Johnny Jennings, powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
So we are here with Paul Frank. He is the president and CEO of PDF Group of Companies. They do a lot of commercial real estate, and in the residential space, there's been a lot of talk, unless you've been living under a rock, about residential real estate commissions and how commissions are going to get slashed, they're going to get repaid. And, you know, allow me to hop up on my soapbox here for just 2 seconds. There's 6% is a lot of money, which is, I'm not saying there is a standard rate. There is no standard rate. But just so we're clear, that 6% gets halved between the person typically representing the buyer and typically the person representing the seller. So now we're down to 3%. So you're paying 3% for your agent. To get it, it's a lot of money. But you pay 3% when you go and run your card every single time to get milk. You pay 6% when your insurance agent writes a policy. You pay 1% a year, 1% a year or more for a financial advisor to manage your money. And so anyways, we're talking about 3%, but let's talk about commercial. What do the numbers look like in commercial, Paul? Like, can you give us a typical example?
Yeah, I was making some notes. That's a really good point about financial advisors and insurance. I've never thought about that before. Yeah, this whole NAR issue, well, first of all, in the commercial space, for the most part, we are not realtors. In fact, in many cases, we're prohibited from being realtors. So we're not in the MLS and part of that system, National Association of Realtors, and in our state, California Association of Realtors. So when this settlement and issue came up, the speaking that I do, I get a lot of questions on it, and I came to realize that basically these changes in place bring residential to the same place that commercial has been forever. That's how we operate, which the commission structure, who pays and how much, is part of the negotiations of the deal. It's not a given as it was for the most part in residential for a while.
Yeah.
Ever.
And so, yeah, you bring up a good point. So typically, I went on 4 listing appointments yesterday, and you sit down and you go, okay, here's typically what we charge. Here's typically what the buyer agent's gonna expect on their end, so that way your property gets full market exposure. And it's a range. There's no set amount, but that, you're right, that is going away. Where now the buyer agent is going to have to say, hey, here's what it costs to work with me. Here's what the value of that relationship is, and it's separating the two. But so when you are putting together deals, what's an example of, like, do you have a deal right now that you're working on, or a deal that you've done in the past that you can share some numbers about, like just what to expect as an agent, what you can expect to get paid on a deal, like gross?
Yeah, well, there's 2 lanes, if you will. One, you have lease transactions, and the other, you have purchase transactions. On the lease side, the commission structure, it varies all over the place, even on the listing side. But the main component of the math is the aggregate value of the lease. So if it's a 5-year lease, whatever the base rent gross value is of that term is what the commission is based on.
Okay.
Whether that's 6% split 3-3 or some tiered component depends on the listing and what the offering is. And an offer coming in could include a commission of any amount from that lessee's broker. So he or she could ask for 5% full commission on this lease coming in. It's part of the negotiation. On the sales side, same thing. It depends on when you get into triple net QSR transactions, which are quick serve restaurants, drive-throughs, things like that. Very competitive area. You could see 1.5% to 2% being offered to the buyer side. And then it varies up to, as we were discussing, I had a land deal, $30 million deal, and the offer came in and they were demanding 5% commission to the buyer side.
Just on the buyer side?
Just on the buyer side.
$30 million.
Yeah. $30 million purchase price with a 5% demand for the commission side.
So that's $1.5 million?
Correct. Yeah.
Just to the buyer.
Right.
So that's 5% just to the buyer. So if you're out there thinking about buying a home right now, your agent's cheaper than that commercial agent. You're paying less than $1.5 million in fees. So it's, I mean, the numbers are relative. I get that. And then there's, so that's in addition to the person paying you, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So what would the total commissions in this example be?
Yeah, in that case, if that one had gone through, it's 3% on our side, 5%, so 8% on $30 million, so $2.4 million total commission.
Wow, and it would be in that example, the seller paying.
Correct.
8%.
Correct.
And so I was in a luxury property the other day for $1.8 million, or excuse me, $1.8 million, and he was like, "That just seems like a whole lot of money," and I'm like, "Man, like." Granted, this person's going through a harder hardship, right? He's going through some financial troubles, and so he's trying to make every dollar count. But when I meet with other people or other industries, the numbers are just like, it's not unrealistic for the service that's being provided and for the work that's being done. It's just, I don't know. It's just totally different.
No, and that was an eye-opener. I love those examples that you gave with insurance and financial advisors. I've never thought about that before. The other thing on the commercial side is that if you have in residential, if you have a lead for a buy or sell, as long as all the parties are reasonable involved in that, you're going to stick that lead most of the time. If they want to buy $1.5 million house in Folsom, as long as they're qualified to buy it, you're going to eventually find a home for them in most cases. Mm-hmm. In our world, we work for months and months and years sometimes and can't ever fit that. Like if you wanted a 20,000-foot warehouse to purchase in Elk Grove, for example, or Roseville, that product may not exist in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And some of, like, we had another land project or sale. It was about a $25 million deal. I think we had close to 3 years into it, and it blew up at within a week of closing.
Really?
And that's not the kind of transaction where you say next, who's next in line. It will take years to replace that buyer.
Yeah, it's not the type of transaction where it's like, oh, we got a backup offer waiting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man. Okay, so the numbers are great, and you're speaking you make a good point about, I wanted to just talk about so how you and I, we've done technically a deal together.
Yes, sir.
It was like mailbox money. Now, normally I don't like talking about dollars and cents. People get weird especially when it's on a personal level. But is that okay if we talk about it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we get a lead coming in. They're interested in making a move, acquiring a commercial property. That's all I know. I don't know what they're looking in. I don't know any of that. And all I know is that we do not handle currently commercial transactions with our team. And so what I've done in the past is I've referred them out to other brokers, and I've had crickets every single time. Maybe they sold them a property and they just didn't send me the referral fee. I don't know. I just hey, if they're good people, they'll send it my way. And then all of a sudden we get an email from you saying, hey, this property's closing. And I'm like, what? Like, what? I don't even know what their price range was. I don't even know what the referral fee, how all this works out. And so we got a check in the mail, again, mailbox money for $18,000 from you.
Yes, sir.
And so just totally made our month, right? Like, it just cannot speak highly enough about working with you guys. You guys got the job done, and you got us paid. And if a real estate agent is looking for somebody that they can rely on and trust on, how is the best way to begin the conversation with you? Like, begin that process? Yeah,
this is something I'm pretty passionate about. And, coming from my coaching background, we do a lot of training and help residential agents kind of open their eyes to the potential of expanding their business in commercial real estate. And it is less about me and my team. If we work together with those people, or I work with them, and there's some mutually beneficial relationship, that's great. I'm driven more by the stories of success. So if they get their eyes open and can make something out of it, I love hearing about that. But it's definitely a missed opportunity for residential agents.
So many agents, and I honestly think most agents just don't know where to go. They don't know who to send it to.
Yeah, our culture is interesting, and I don't want to be negative about it, but for the most part, especially when you're dealing with the globals, the big companies, their structure is essentially don't cooperate or work with residential agents because it's too much trouble, too much liability, especially if they're trying to represent on either side of the transaction. And a lot of that comes from the legal structure and difference between residential and commercial. In residential, you have all these disclosures, and it's mind-boggling. I've never sold a house in my life, and it scares the heck out of me.
That's so funny. I feel the same way about commercial.
Well, in commercial, we don't have all of the disclosures, hardly any disclosures for that matter. But the law also assumes that everybody engaged in commercial real estate is a professional and knows what they're doing or has access to professionals. So it's truly caveat emptor. So that really opens the door to liability if you don't know what you're doing. So that, as far as getting a hold of somebody, a lot of residential agents will sort of be burned out on when they get a commercial opportunity because they won't get a response from commercial agents or they feel disrespected. And that's something that, again, we're passionate about and try to train them in how to approach it and take advantage of those opportunities when they come up.
You make a good point. Yeah, that is exactly what had been my experience prior to working with you. Just goes into the abyss, and I'm like, well, hopefully it works. Don't know why they're being such punks about this. I'm trying to send them business. But with you, it was very similar to sending a referral out on a residential transaction. We got regular updates, and then we got paid. And so, can't speak highly enough about working with you and your team. But if somebody is, and this is something you're passionate about as well, is real estate agents. They may work for, we keep talking about dentist, a lawyer. They may work for people involved in real estate investing, and they help them buy their personal home, but they're not even looking for the commercial opportunity in that relationship. But you help agents open their eyes to that, and you have courses on commercial?
Yeah, we do a lot of training and classes. The EYB, or Expand Your Business. It's interesting you say that because that's one of the premises for residential agents is this. In my nearly 4 decades of experience in commercial real estate, there are a couple truths that I've discovered that are incredibly important to every residential agent. And the first one is, in those 4 decades, there's one thing in common that everybody involved in commercial real estate has, whether it is an owner, syndicator, developer, tenant, business owner, and that is that they live in a house. And by virtue of that commonality, they have something else in common that's even more important to the residential realtor, and that is that all of those people have a relationship with them. with a residential realtor. The problem is that for the vast majority, they have blinders on. They're looking for the 4-bedroom, 3-bath house in Nashville, and nothing else makes the radar screen. Mm-hmm. They have what I refer to as peripheral deal vision. So what we try to do is teach them how to remove the blinders and secure peripheral deal vision and take advantage of the opportunities that are around them daily.
I mean, my mind is blown right now talking about, you're right, everybody that is involved in a commercial transaction, I mean, even if they don't own a home, they live somewhere. They're dealing with a property manager, which could be a real estate agent, or they're living in a home. And why is that agent not at some point in their process saying, because we ask for referrals all the time, but there were residential referrals. Why aren't we delving into commercial referrals? So how would you recommend, if you were in my shoes and you're a residential agent, at what point would you bring up the commercial conversation?
Again, it's about taking those blinders off, and we have a six-step process to succeed in this space that is absolutely proven, and it's really fun when you see those checks go out to people and they get a check for 10, 20, 30, 40 grand, and they literally hardly did anything, and they're off looking for the next opportunity. There are some very specific reasons that residential agents don't want to try to handle commercial transactions. Mm-hmm. One of the misnomers is that commercial real estate is more complicated than residential, and it really, despite the egos in this business, it isn't more complicated. It's just different. There's a reason that I've never done or sold a house. It's because I know my lane. I don't understand all those disclosures. And everybody has their lane that they're good at, if you will. Yeah. It's no different than medical specialties. My buddy Van is a neurosurgeon, and my buddy Steve is a orthopedic trauma surgeon. You throw Van into that orthopedic trauma surgery, it's trying to save a leg, and he's going to be in trouble, not because orthopedic surgery is more complicated than brain surgery. It's just different. Yep. So getting over that intimidation factor, I guess, and opening your eyes to it, but also realizing that there's some pitfalls that make it not a good idea to just go all in and try to do it yourself. And so you teach that in your Expand Your Business class? Yeah. How do people sign up for that or get more info on it? They can email me directly. I do a bunch of different trainings. Open Mic Wednesday, we bring in residential agents and they just ask questions and throw out case studies, and it's a really interesting environment because I open the door to, the only request is that nobody can preface it with, this is a stupid question, because if I don't know the answer, then inherently I'm the stupid one. You're the stupid one. Yeah, that's a fun rule. Yeah. And I will agree. But I think there are some silly questions. Occasionally. Occasionally, But so if an agent is looking to get involved in commercial real estate, like you also help with that. It's not just on the referral side, correct? We help them with anything. There's really three reasons that I focus on why they don't want to try to do it themselves. Number one is the distraction, because their core business is residential real estate. Commercial opportunities will come to them through that core business. Yep. And inevitably, when they are distracted by this shiny new penny that's a commercial deal, there is a price to pay for that distraction, and sometimes it is absolutely devastating. Many times it is, because they'll just leave deals and calls and responsibilities on their core business because they're so excited about this commercial deal. Yep. The second thing are the tools that we use in commercial real estate. Commercial is a pay-to-play proposition. So if agents are relying on the MLS or even LoopNet to try to compete and represent, they're going to get themselves in trouble because they don't have the tools or our equivalent MLS in the commercial space. Mm-hmm. And then the last one that we sort of touched on it is the liability. In residential, if you make a mistake, you may be looking at thousands, maybe tens of thousands in exposure. In commercial real estate, the stakes can be much, much higher. And then again, to compound that, the law assumes that everybody engaged in commercial real estate is an expert. So we don't have the protections of all those disclosures for both the agent and themselves.
Man, okay. Yeah, you bring up some good points. So, I mean, that's why Valerie and I, we don't focus on commercial. Like we've done a couple on the side. It just fell in our laps, and the two parties wanted to come together. But as far as if we get a commercial inquiry, boom, we're sending them over to Paul Frank. That's our process. And then it was pretty fast too. At least the deal that we did, was it 60 days, something like that, which is pretty quick.
It was unusual, but yes.
Yeah. So hey, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being on the show today, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and one last time, if people want to reach out to you, what's that email?
It is Paul, Paul, at PDF, like the Adobe file, -USA.com. That's Paul at PDF-USA.com. And I have to make this clear. A dash is a hyphen, mid-letter, because some reason a lot of people these days don't necessarily get what that dash looks like.
Fair enough. Hey, and if you don't understand what a dash is, or you just didn't catch the email, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get you connected to Paul. Thanks again.
Thank you.